Namaste and welcome to the second episode of History of Bharatvarsha, brought to you by Indian History Awareness and Research, a think tank based in Houston. I am Sahana Singh and with me is Raj Vedam. Last week we examined the history of yoga. Today we will explore a critical aspect of history, the dating of Adi Shankara. Now Adi Shankara is one of the most renowned gurus of Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism, whose famous commentaries on the principal Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita have shaped the beliefs of generations of Hindus. In fact, many Hindus in their daily prayers invoke him by saying, and I am reading out the English translation here, I salute the lineage of teachers beginning with Sadashiva and ending with my own guru, with Shankaracharya in the middle. So he is always acknowledged in prayers. Shankara is the foremost exponent of Advaita philosophy. So Raj, you have researched Adi Shankara in great detail. So can you shed some light on his early life and how he got into the path of spirituality?
Thank you, Sahanaji, and namaste to all our listeners. Adi Shankara was born in Kaladi in Kerala, a village on the banks of the Purna river, to a Nambudari Brahmin family. His mother was Aryamba or Vishishta Devi, and he belonged to the Atri Gotram and belonged to the Vedic branch of Krishna Yajurveda. There is a delightful story of Adi Shankara's childhood present in almost all accounts of his life. When he was a child of 8 and drawn strongly to sannyasa, his mother, unfortunately at that time she was a widow, was not prepared to let him go. One day when having a bath in the Purna river, a crocodile started dragging Adi Shankara in. He cried out to his mother for permission to take up sannyasa, else a crocodile would kill him. Torn between two hard choices, Aryamba granted him permission to take up sannyasa, upon which the crocodile let him go. To pacify his sorrowful mother, Adi Shankara declared to her, as recounted in Madhaviya Shankara Vijayam in verse 5.71, he said, O mother, when you think of me, I will give up all my work and come to you. Whether you think of me at day, night or sandhya time, whether you are conscious, unconscious or burdened with sorrow, if you die, I will myself perform your last rites and you can believe me. Young Shankara then left Kaladi to find his guru, whom he found on the banks of Narmada river, Govinda Bhagavat Pada. And in the course of his studies, he travelled to Kashi and Badrinath.
You know, when I think of Shankara, the first thing that comes to mind is Bhaja Govindam. So it's such a profound stotra that comes from the depth of the heart, and at the same time it summarizes his Advaita philosophy. But of course he is the author of so many other great works, right? Could you give some details about those works?
Yes, Adi Shankara wrote Bhashyas, which can be likened to perhaps to systematic reviews and expository commentaries. The three primary philosophical texts that are there in Sanatana Dharma, which I'm sure most of our listeners know, the Upanishads, which there are several of them, the Bhagavad Gita and the Brahma Sutras. So these are called the Prasthana Trayi. He wrote Bhashyas on 10 of the many extant Upanishads. Hence these Upanishads are considered to be the primary texts of study. So these Upanishads are the Aitreya Upanishad from Rig Veda, the Isha, Katha, Taittiriya and Brihadaranyaka from Yajurveda, the Kena and Chandogya from Samaveda, and Prashna, Mundaka and Mandukya from Atharvana Veda. He also wrote commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, Apashtamba Dharma Sutras and notes on Yoga Sutras. But perhaps what Adi Shankara is most well known for is his masterful work on Brahma Sutra Bhashya. He also wrote several stotrams, and these are poetic works. And these include Dakshinamurti Stotram, the very well known Bhaja Govindam Stotram, as you pointed out, and Shivananda Lahiri, among others. Adi Shankara also authored Upadesas Sahasri as well as Viveka Chudamani, and these are some of his most important philosophical works. About 76 works are attributed to Adi Shankara, though this figure is in dispute by some scholars who think that perhaps some of them were authored by his students.
Okay. See, one of the things that we studied about Adi Shankara in school is that he traveled all over India and he established 4 mathas in the north, south, east and west of India. In fact, whenever someone argues with me that there was no concept of one India or Bharatvarsha, and it was the British who united India, then I ask them, why did Adi Shankara travel to the four extremities of India and establish his mathas there? So this is a sign that he considered the region as one unified homeland. Anyway, Raj, you can tell us more about the significance of Adi Shankara's travels.
True, I completely concur with your thought process there, Sahanaji, that the fact that Adi Shankara did travels throughout the region that we call Bharatvarsha, which also includes portions of today's Pakistan, does show the feeling that people had of what this nation is and how far its extents are. So Adi Shankara's travels, or Digvijaya, was a spiritual conquest. So Adi Shankara, what he did was he engaged in spiritual debates with opponents using an ancient Indian debating method called Purva Paksha. Now this word was lost in lexicon, I could say, for some time, but more recently these words have been popularized in recent books by Rajiv Malhotra, for example. Adi Shankara engaged the atheists, the Buddhists, the Jains and other orthodox Hindu scholars in debates, where the typical terms of the debate were that the loser should follow the victor's philosophies. Needless to say, Shankara won almost perhaps all of the debates that he took up. His travels took him all over ancient India, from Kashmir to Nepal to Tamil Nadu to Andhra Pradesh, Vidarbha, Karnataka, in Saurashtra and Girnar, Somnath, Prabhasa, Dwaraka,
my goodness,
and all the way up to Cambodia, which is perhaps the north of Kashmir. So as you pointed out, he established 4 mathams or monasteries, if you could call it that, at Sringeri, Dwaraka, Puri and Jyotirmatha in the Himalayas. Each of these mathas is associated with a aphorism or a universal or principal truth, as you can say, from the Upanishad. The Puri or the Govardhana Matha in the east is associated with Prajnanam Brahma, which also means consciousness is Brahman. The Sringeri Sharada Matham in the south is associated with Aham Brahmasmi, which is I am Brahman. The Dwaraka Matha in the west is associated with Tattvam Asi, which means that thou art. And the Jyotir Matha in the north is associated with I am Atma Brahma. This Atman is Brahma. In the journeys undertaken by Adi Shankara, he met many scholars, and perhaps the most important ones that we know from history are Kumarila Bhatt and Madana Mishra. The journey is critically important, or I should say was critically important in reviving Hinduism, scholarly traditions and synthesis of different orthodoxies into a unified framework. For example, his reconciliation of Advaita and Smarta orthodoxy resulted in the worship of Ganesha, Shiva, Vishnu, Shakti and Surya, which were different schools at one point, in a unified framework, allowing people to take any of these deities as the Ishta Devata.
I see. And can we now talk about the period in which Shankara lived? I know he had a very short life. He lived just for 32 years. I don't know how he managed to do all that he did in such a short life. But in school we were taught that he lived sometime close to 800 CE. But now I hear that the date is not all that clearly defined.
Right. Sahanaji, the dating of Adi Shankara is a contentious topic among Hindus. Here is perhaps an instance when the principal mathams that he founded also do not agree upon the date or the period of Adi Shankara, who, as you pointed out, lived for 32 years. For example, the Sringeri Matham maintains that Adi Shankara can be dated to from 788 current era to 820 current era. The Govardhana Matha, Dwaraka Matha and the Kanchi Matha maintain that Adi Shankara can be dated to a much earlier period, 509 BCE to 477 BCE. There are other periods also. There is one notable one that dates him to 44 BCE to 12 BCE by the well-known astrologist B.V. Raman.
Okay. No, but this is very astonishing, because why is it so hard to pin down a date for such an important figure and one who has produced so much of literary works? I mean, we even have the mathas still standing, right? We still have those mathas which he set up. So what evidence do we have to support the dates proposed by Sringeri Math?
Very good question. Now, if you refer to the scholar Vidya Shankar Sundareshan, at the website advaita-vedanta.org, we see that the primary evidence from Sringeri is a Matta's record stating that Adi Shankara was born in the 14th year in the reign of the king Vikramaditya. Secondary evidence comes from Shankara's quotation of Dharmakirti, who was a Buddhist professor at the university at Nalanda. And the subsequent dating of Dharmakirti or Nalanda gives reason to date Shankara after Dharmakirti. We can note that Dharmakirti is dated to a window between 480 current era to about 660 current era. So there's some uncertainty in the dating of Dharmakirti too. So what follows is Adi Shankara should be dated after this period. We also note that the Chinese traveler Huensang quotes Dharmakirti and visited Nalanda in 630 CE, and he is silent about Adi Shankara. If Adi Shankara was a big guru at that time, and he should have been noted by this well-known traveler who had his ears and eyes open to the customs of the land. So
no, but he has mentioned other gurus.
Huensang has mentioned a lot about contemporary life and the Buddhist masters that he met, and about life in general. So one would have assumed that if Adi Shankara was there in that period of time, he would have to mention. So in the year 630 current era, he is silent about Adi Shankara. So all these things suggest that Adi Shankara is dated after this period, that is after Dharmakirti and after Huensang. And these things support the Sringeri date that perhaps Adi Shankara is between 788 current era to 820 current era.
Okay. But then you said Shankara was born in the 14th year of the reign of Vikramaditya, right? Now, which Vikramaditya is it? Because I believe there were a whole lot of kings who like to take the name of Vikramaditya.
Yes, indeed. And if you're a kid in India, you read stories of Vikramaditya and the Vetala. Right. So yes, there are a lot of Vikramaδιtyas in Indian history. So from my list here, we have a Vikramaditya with whom we associate the calendar, the Vikram Samvat calendar, commemorating the king's victory over the Sakas in the year 56 BCE. Now, you also have the very famous Gupta emperor, Chandragupta Vikramaditya, who lived in the year 375 CE, and Fahian, another Chinese traveler, visited this king. So we know that time period. In the south, among the rulers called Chalukyas, we have several Vikramadityas there. There's a Vikramaditya I of Chalukyas who lived in 655 current era. There's a Vikramaditya II of Chalukyas who lived in 733 current era. There is a Vikramaditya 4 or 5 of Chalukyas who lived in the year the 11th century, and the Vikramaditya 6 of Chalukyas who also lived in the late 11th century. So what we see from this is, if you have to reconcile a Vikramaditya with the Sringeri records, the nearest is perhaps the Chalukyas Vikramaditya II, who reigned from 733 current era to about 746 current era. Perhaps that is a date where we can say Adi Shankara might have lived, if you want to correlate it with the Sringeri records.
Okay. And then do you have any other evidence to show that Shankara lived during 788 to 820 CE?
Well, there is something that we have to note over here. During his Digvijaya, this is the spiritual journey that I talked about earlier. If we look at all the places that Adi Shankara visited, a curious phenomenon comes out and is apparent to us. Now, Adi Shankara visited Somnath. Somnath is on the Gujarat coast near a place called Veraval in Saurashtra.
The one which was later destroyed by Mahmud, right?
Ghazni, yes. He also visited Pushkar in Rajasthan. And from Pushkar in Rajasthan, he went to Peshawar, which is now in Pakistan. And from there on to Kashmir. Now, Huensang reports that in the year 641 current era, when Huensang visited Sindh, he witnessed magnificent Shiva temples in settlements all along the Indus in Dubal as well as Sindh. Additionally, Huensang also mentions the very famous Sun temple to Prahalada, which was in Multan. It used to be called Multaneshwar, a place drawing a huge, enormous number of pilgrims. This was something that was seared into the consciousness of the Hindu pilgrims of that era, and this was a place of great pilgrimage, this Prahalada temple. Now, Adi Shankara did not visit Dubal, Sindh or Multan. Now we can speculate, why would he not have done that? He went to all the places where he could have philosophical debates with scholars, and typically he went to places of learning and worship which were at the same points in those days. So he did not visit Sindh, he did not visit Dubal, he did not visit Multan. Could it have been because these places were invaded by Bin Qasim, who killed Raja Dahir in the year 712 current era? Did Adi Shankara not visit these places because the Hindu civilization was already destroyed in these regions? Note that Peshawar only fell to Muslims in the year 988 current era, and Kashmir fell only in the 14th century in the current era. So all these things hint that perhaps Adi Shankara did live in the period that the Sringeri Matam maintains, which is in the 788 current era, and he did not visit Sindh and Multan and Dubal because those places were already under Muslim control and hostile to Hindus.
Okay. This is very, very interesting. Then what about now going back to the earlier date of 509 to 477 BCE, what evidence do we have to support that?
Yes, this is the other fascinating part of the dating over here. The older date meaning the 509 BCE, this is based on hints in Adi Shankara's Bhashyas, which are commentaries, as I said earlier, as well as using astronomical data that is found in these texts. Now, the scholar Vidya Shankar Sundareshan notes in a brilliant essay on advaitavedanta.org that a main objection to this 509 BCE date is that it requires Buddha to be dated even earlier. So Vidya Shankar also notes that the lineage of Acharyas at Sringeri has been unbroken, whereas the Matams in the north, west and east have broken records due to invasion. There were periods of time when there were no Shankaracharyas in addition. So he calls into question the accuracy of the records that are maintained in the other Matams, and he hints that perhaps the Sringeri Matam is more accurate.
I see. But the dating of Buddha itself is an issue, right? So it's not established that he lived sometime in 400 BC.
That is indeed the commonly accepted time frame in modern history, that Buddha might have lived around 400 BCE. But we should note that there is a lot of debate on dating Gautama Buddha. And dating of Gautama Buddha is critically important because that event provides an anchor to much of the events in Indian history.
Right.
So it's critically important for Indians to date Gautama Buddha accurately. Now, if you look at traditional accounts from China, Japan and Korea, in those traditions, they fix Buddha's date to anywhere between 949 BCE to 878 BCE, which is a pretty long time back. If you look at northern Buddhism, which is basically in Tibet and Mongolia, they fix the date to about 881 BCE. Now, most people used to think that it was about 686 BC was the accepted date for Buddha's period, and whereas a southern Buddhism would include southern India, Amaravati, where Andhra Pradesh is, as well as Sri Lanka and other places, they fixed the date to 543 BCE. Now, from the 17th century onwards, European scholars who discovered many of these records, they tried to fix the Greek sources to Pali, and they converged towards a later date, about 500 BCE. Now, this time got progressively pushed downwards in the 19th and 20th century, when European scholars and Indians trained in European methods proposed dates of 483 BCE or 486 BCE. Now, more recently, there are opinions that fix Buddha's date to 100 years before Ashoka's coronation. So this would make it to 368 BCE, which is based on Bana's epic Ashokavadana. Now, you can note for reference that Alexander's campaign in India is 326 BCE. Right. So this date has been pushed closer and closer to this date, and I think we know why that might be happening. To perhaps explain a lot of philosophies of Buddha that are prevalent all over Europe. If it comes closer to the Greeks' time, perhaps they can show influence of Greek thought in Buddhism. I don't know, but there appears to be a trend to push Buddha further and further down. Now, in November of 2013, archaeologists in Nepal shocked the world with the news of a Buddhist temple excavated in Lumbini, which they dated to 550 BCE. Opening the possibility of much earlier dating for Gautama Buddha. On top of all this, we have accounts, and they have lineage of kings from the time of Mahabharata itself. If we follow this lineage, then there is much greater antiquity hinted for Gautama Buddha. And hold your breath, according to the Puranic accounts, we can date Gautama Buddha to perhaps 1894 BCE, which is a pretty ancient time period. So what is the bottom line from all this? I think there is controversy around Buddha's date. If we accept the accounts of the practitioners meaning the Chinese, the Japanese and others, we should be open to much earlier time periods of Buddha. What this means is the Dwaraka records with a date of 509 BCE for Shankara certainly become plausible with a date for Gautama Buddha pushed back to earlier times. And this obviously requires other anchor events to be reconciled, such as Greek visits to the Mauryan court.
So there's so much evidence pointing to an earlier date. And I was also wondering, has Adi Shankara made any reference to Islam? Because Islam was founded as a religion in the 7th century, right?
Yes.
So if Shankara lived in the 8th century, he would have been aware of Islam.
You're absolutely right. So what strikes me when you look at the accounts of Adi Shankara is that he's absolutely silent about Islam. If he lived in the time frame from 788 current era, he would have been aware of Arab traders in Kerala. He was born in Kerala. Kerala had Arab traders both in the pre-Islamic times as well as in the post-Islamic times. They used to follow the monsoon winds, come to Kerala, trade, wait for the favorable winds again and return back to their place. So he would have been aware of the Arab traders in Kerala as well as the philosophies that they espoused. He would have heard of Raja Cheraman Perumal, who was a local Raja who converted to Islam.
Right.
He reportedly also went to Mecca and met the Prophet of the Muslims and who advised him to go back, and he's supposed to have started the first mosque in India in Kerala. Adi Shankara would also have heard of the destruction of temples in Sindh and Multan, which were deeply traumatic events in the Hindu psyche. Why did he not mention Islam at all? He labored so hard to protect Hinduism from atheistic philosophies, from Buddhism, which negated the soul, the Atman, and so on. But there is no mention about the destructive Islam at all. So if we ponder upon this, then perhaps this is possible if Adi Shankara lived in an era before Islam began. So this supports an earlier date for Adi Shankara.
Okay. So that leaves us with the third date, which was propounded by B.V. Raman, which is 44 BCE. How credible is this?
Indeed, it is a credible date. If we accept the Sringeri evidence of 14 years into the reign of Vikramaditya of Ujjain, of the Vikram Samvat fame. Now, this time period that this Vikramaditya lived is 56 BCE. Then if we consider this 56 BCE as the anchor point, then 14 years into the reign of that, a time period of 44 BCE for Adi Shankara becomes feasible. Now your question should be, how did B.V. Raman get this date of 44 BCE? He used the horoscope of Adi Shankara. He used the horoscope, and based on the horoscope, he fixed the dates, the positions of the planets when he was born, the known positions of the planets, and cranking back in calendars such as Stellarium and other such places, you can get the date for when Adi Shankara might have lived. And he used methods like this. I'm not saying he used Stellarium, which is more of a recent software. He used methods that he could compute the positions, and he determined that 44 BCE is the birth date for Adi Shankara.
So Shankara's horoscope is available?
Apparently, because B.V. Raman is a horoscope astrologist, so he looked at that.
Okay.
So if you accept that Buddha lived earlier, like I said earlier, and proportionately you rescale the events in Indian history, you see that Nalanda could have been set up earlier, Dharmakirti could have practiced earlier to Adi Shankara. So all this allows a consistent framework where Adi Shankara could have lived earlier, and these events could have happened the way it is. Huan Sang could have visited in the time frame set for him during Harsha's reign. He could have taken note of Nalanda, which was not yet ravaged by Bhaktiar Khilji. He could have quoted Dharmakirti, and so everything is consistent. So all that we require is that if he lived in the time frame of Vikramaditya of Ujjain, then yes, it is a feasible point.
So it's amazing how so much of Hindu history depends on the date of Adi Shankara's birth. One thing I've noted is that passions run very high when it comes to the dating of Shankara. Right? Or all the sides hold on to their beliefs on.
True, indeed. But again, I think we should not be caught up in the chauvinism of dating. An earlier or later date for Adi Shankara does not in any way diminish the immense value of his works on today's Hinduism. So, as seekers of truth, we should examine all available evidence, both for and against, and we should continuously attempt to refine our knowledge of the past. So I don't think we should be caught up too much in dating, but accept the value of Adi Shankara's works.
Thank you so much, Raj. Your research has brought up such gems. And we must also thank our sponsors for bringing this show to people. A transcript and podcast of this conversation will be available on our Facebook page. Please look for Indian History Awareness and Research on Facebook. And we also have our email address IHAR.project@gmail.com if anyone wants to give feedback. Please join us again next week for another fascinating discussion on the history of Bharatvarsha. Thank you.
Thank you, listeners. Namaste and Hari Om.